Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the unification of Italy in the late 1800s, right? So, we are continuing our discussion right now of Europe following the revolutions of 1848, following all this chaos, following all this different fallout, and following a very large wave and a new push of liberal reforms, urban planning, and then also that second industrial revolution. Now, the stuff that we're about to talk about is going on during all that, right? We're playing around on our timeline a little bit, right? We're going to do our 1800s timeline so everything's not so confusing and stuff like that. We're going to build that thing in my class. It's going to be awesome, but y'all are doing great. Had a lot of really good questions yesterday. Loved how many of y'all came to S period doing your test corrections and stuff like that, asking really, really good questions and getting the most out of that you possibly could, right? But let's go ahead and pick up where we left off in class, because we were talking about the phases of Italian history, right? We were talking about how Italy hasn't been a unified country since 476, right? Under the Romans, and then after Rome falls in 476 AD, they would then be split into a multitude of different regions, a multitude of different sections, and a multitude of different states that are owned either independently or by some other European nation, right? For example, you had the Austrians who owned Venice for quite some time. They also owned Lombardy, which is home to the very modern-day city of Milan, right? Okay, and then a lot of other major areas that were actually broken up into their own different areas, right? They had cultural residings, they had certain things that they actually liked about themselves, and they also had some internal rivalries and stuff like that too. Remember I told you that story about my Florence tour guide who was like, I'd rather not have a person from Pisa at my door. Now, so the big thing about it, though, is going into it, nationalism has been exploding since the French Revolution, okay? We talked about the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies example, because the thing about it is that even if Italy wanted to unify before 1848, it was going to be pretty difficult because people like Clemens von Metternich are going to come in and destroy that attempt, right? So the thing about it is, though, is going into their unification movements following the revolutions of 1848, and also following one of them led by one of these guys, the big thing that you need to actually understand is that there were a lot of different opinions on how to unify Italy, what a unified Italy was going to look like, and how to create this new Kingdom of Italy, aka the country of Italy that you know of today. Well, going into it, there were these three main big perspectives. One was actually pioneered by this guy named Giuseppe Mazzini, and Giuseppe Mazzini actually created a group called Young Italy, and actually inspired by an opera and a play and things like that at literally this very, very large get-together that spilled into the streets. He actually led the revolution of 1848 with the hopes of creating a unified Italy that would actually have a liberal, democratic republic, much like France had tried to do during their revolution twice. All right, so now the thing about it, though, is that that's going to be really, really difficult because liberal democratic republics are very, very hard to pull off. And also because by this point in European history, the only people that have done it really, really well are the Dutch. So, good for them. Well, the thing about it, though, is sort of, kind of. Now, the thing about it, though, going into it also, is then you have people like Vincenzo Ghiberti. And Vincenzo Ghiberti preached in capital letters, as you can see right there, that literally, because he was a Catholic priest, get it? A federation of states under a progressive pope, right? And then others preached the idea of a monarch led by northern Italy, which is Sardinia, Piedmont, which is what they had already, which is a really, really big thing as well. So the thing about it is, as you can see, we've got very different perspectives on how to create this new unified Italy, right? Well, the thing about it is following the revolutions, following the failed revolutions of 1848, when Austria suppressed them in northern Italy, because what's going to end up happening in northern Italy when the revolutions of 1848 are going on, not Metternich, because he fled, but the Austrian government under Franz Joseph is going to send a very large army contingent into Venice, Lombardy, and then also towards the border of Sardinia, Piedmont, to suppress any growing revolutions or revolutionary sentiment that may be getting too close to that all-important little area, the Papal States. Keep that in the back of your mind. Getting too close to the Papal States and getting too close to creating this idea known as Italy, right? So the big thing about it, though, that you do need to understand is that they are going to be a huge nuisance. Look at the Papal States right here. The thing owned by the Catholic Church. The middle section owned and controlled by the Pope right here that actually had a lot of power and a lot of political power throughout all of Europe because they could convince Austria to do just about whatever they wanted because Austria was Catholic, right? Same thing with France, because France is still super Catholic. And the Papal States also divide Italy directly in half from a progressive northern Italy and a very rural agrarian southern Italy. Okay, so the Papal States are going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt. And then going forward, though, you are going to see the rise of two very important figures, though, okay? Two very important figures that are actually going to turn the tide of this unification movement and lead Italy towards unification. And their names are Victor Emmanuel II, this guy right here, with his sweet facial hair, looking like these bad boys right there, right? I think like that's very, very nice stuff. I think I might grow one myself. Now, then you also have another very important figure known as Count Cavour, okay? So this is the first part of that pattern, aka that cookie cutter system that we need to have in the back of our mind, Delilah, okay? And what that is that when we're leading these unification movements, whether it be in Italy or Germany, when we talk about in Germany as well going forward, you got to remember one key thing. The kings don't do that much. The kings are much more like figureheads, hereditary monarchs installing themselves into power after the unification movement is successful. The thing about it, though, is that each of these kings has like a sidekick or a right-hand man or a chancellor or a count or a parliamentary advisor that is very, very powerful and very, very intelligent. In this situation in Italy, Victor Emmanuel is the monarch, Count Cavour is the statesman, right? And Count Cavour is the genius that leads Italy to unification. Whether you could call it by accident or actually you could call it by just absolute playing 4D chess, who really knows, okay? The big thing about it, though, going forward is Count Cavour is the Italian version of this statesman, whereas in Germany, you'll have a man named Bismarck, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. Bismarck, like Bismarck, North Dakota, is actually named after Otto von Bismarck. Now, Count Cavour, though, being so important, as we just talked about him, you got to understand a couple of little things about him, like he was born to a wealthy Italian noble family in the northern area of Italy, and he had actually, growing up, had received a very, very good classical education, and had actually witnessed the revolutions of 1848, had witnessed the ideas of the unification of Italy growing from a small, small idea into an ever-petulant, very, very larger one, right? Now, the original ideas, though, were simple. Count Cavour came up with a plan, and he was like, let's just unite northern Italy, right? Let's leave the south to figure out their own stuff, leave them to their own vices, let them figure out their agrarian agricultural stuff, because we don't want to try and leapfrog over the papal states, because it's going to lead to a big issue. Why? Because the Catholic Church opposes unification during this time period, right? The Catholic Church knows that if Italy unifies, the papal states will be reduced and or their power will be greatly reduced as well. And they are also home to one of the largest and most important cities in Europe, the papal states is, which brings them a lot of money and income, that being Rome, right? So the thing about it, though, is that Count Cavour was like, look, we'll just unite the northern territories, right? And the way he wants to pull that off is he wants to convince Victor Emmanuel II, the king of Sardinia, Piedmont. So the thing that you need to understand is that Count Cavour and Victor Emmanuel are in charge of Sardinia, Piedmont. If we go back to that little Italy map real quick, can I just jump out real quick? Okay, we're going to go back to that Italy map real fast. So Cavour and Victor Emmanuel II ruled this area right here in the Piedmont and Sardinia, right? Sardinia, Piedmont. These two little regions in pink is what Cavour and Victor Emmanuel are in charge of. What Cavour wants to do, though, is unite all those northern Italian regions, including Florence, Lombardy, and then also Venice, right? Three very, very strong cities, and he was like, you know what? We'll just leave Rome to their own thing. We won't touch them, and we won't, incur the ire of Austria and all the other Catholic countries in Europe, right? So Count Cavour convinces Victor Emmanuel II to create a progressive liberal state with a monarch, right? Create basically a new idea of a British government in Italy. He wants a new constitution that has civil liberties. He wants also Victor Emmanuel II to support the construction of railroads and infrastructure. And he wants to reduce the role of the church in political gains and ideas and begin to separate the church and state. Victor Emmanuel agrees to all of these things, and the progression continues to go. They actually create a very, very solid state in Sardinia, Piedmont, with the idea of trying to maybe figure out a way to unite the northern provinces. Well, someone approaches them because the reforms that they are bringing in actually emulate that of what Napoleon is doing in France, right? Napoleon III, the leader of the Second French Empire by this point, the leader of all these different things going on over in France, of the Haussmann reforms, of building railroads, of creating all this new city and these social welfare programs and stuff like that, and creating a liberalized constitutional government. Napoleon III, the moderate, sees what Cavour and Victor Emmanuel is doing, is like, maybe Sardinia Piedmont is somebody that I should have on my side. And so what they end up doing together is they actually enter into an alliance together. Cavour negotiates an alliance with Napoleon III, and they have two distinct premises. Cavour tells Napoleon III, my biggest issue is I got these people called the Austrians that are really, really irking my nerves right now because they actually control Lombardy, which is in Milan, which is home to Milan, which has a lot of money and a lot of like trade negotiation like elements. And y'all remember back in the Renaissance, it was a trade hub. Huge amounts of money and product moved through Milan. So, Italy wants it. Or, Sardinia, Piedmont, they want it. So the big thing about it is they want that, and then they also really, really want Venice because it's literally a cultural home of Italy and also an economic hub and a huge port city. And another big one is Florence. Florence, though, isn't controlled by Austria at this point. They actually are controlled independently by themselves, but they also want to figure out a way to, gobble them up as well. So Cavour goes up to Napoleon III and says, we need your army to pull this off if we're going to fight the Austrians. Well, Napoleon's like, well, look, first things first, I'm about to go to war soon, all right? So, the thing about it is Napoleon III is about to go to war with Russia. Something that's going on in the 1850s, right after Napoleon becomes the Emperor of France, is this thing known as the Crimean War. Keep that thing in the back of your mind. The Crimean War is going to be very important at the beginning of the next unit because it's actually going to demonstrate to Russia how unmodernized they actually are and how backwards they were technologically, right? So Sardinia agrees to support France in the Crimean War, send troops to the Crimean War, and help France defeat Russia and prevent them from gaining access to the Black Sea and taking over the Dardanelles Strait when it comes to the creation of trade networks in the Mediterranean and things like that. France then says, if you help us in the Crimean, we will help you get Austria out of northern Italy. Deal? Because the big thing about it is Austria didn't fight in the Crimean War. Actually, there was this really, really interesting dynamic that happened where Russia tried to recruit Austria to their side, but then the other Europeans tried to recruit Austria to their side, which led to Austria kind of in this middle ground where they just didn't know how to make a choice and they just sat it out, right? So now, so the idea was France is like, okay, look, if you help me fight Russia, I'll help you fight Austria, okay? And so that is a great agreement. And after the Crimean War resolves itself, they actually go ahead and start doing this. They begin to push through, and they get Lombardy. The big thing about it is they drive the Austrians out of Lombardy after the Sardinians help out in the Crimean War, and after the Crimean War is won, right? By the other end, Russia loses the Crimean War miserably. Now, weirdly enough, though, France abandons the Italian cause and kind of just jumps off board with this alliance a little early, right? So the thing about it that is when we're looking at this same map or whatever, right? Looking at this map right here, Lombardy, Tuscany, and Venice are the three places that Cavour really wanted, right? Because he was like, look, Parma and Modena will come with us, whether they like it or not. We'll take over these two. It's not a big deal. So driving them out of, the Austrians out of Lombardy and out of Venice is going to be the big thing he wants. But the problem is that France left only after they drove them out of Lombardy. So they literally pushed them out of Lombardy, and then France was like, I don't know if I want to play anymore. And France abandons the cause halfway through. Cavour only gets Lombardy with Milan. Why is this, though? Because France doesn't want to make the Catholic Church mad. He doesn't want to, Napoleon III, doesn't want to incur the ire of French Catholics back in the conservative Chamber of Deputies that they actually have back in France, and he decides to bail when the Papal States puts pressure on him, right? And so the Cavour and Victor Emmanuel did not get to conquer the rest of northern Italy, particularly Venice, like they actually wanted to. They also actually don't even get Venice until 1888, which is crazy. Now, the thing about it, though, is, and they force a peace with Austria, so Cavour only gets Lombardy. Cavour is so mad about this because he feels that his grand plan has been dashed by the Papal States. He actually resigns his position as the Prime Minister of Italy out of rage. He's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Obviously, this isn't going to work. I'm so really, really upset right now because, look at this whole thing. You got this little, remember storyboard that? Look at this guy. So, yeah, you got Cavour right here in the middle being like, I made a secret deal with Napoleon who promised to get, Sardinia, blah, 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 blah. So the thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, he resigns his position out of rage. But something very important happens. This is the second thematic thing, Delilah, that you need to make sure you're focusing on. Attracting the attention of other regions, okay? Now, what happens, though, is Cavour had inspired the Middle countries, including Tuscany, Parma, and Modena, to actually be like, wow, they really believe in this concept of a unified Italy. Maybe we're all better off doing this. We should go and join them and help them fight off the Austrians and help them create this new state, right? So ironically enough, unification movements and nationalism inspires other groups, whether this be deliberate or on accident, inspires other places in your region to join up and believe in that unified state. So Florence and Tuscany being the region, Florence being the city in Tuscany, decide to join up with Sardinia, Piedmont, and now there is a unified northern Italian state, right? So their governments combine with Sardinia and create a unified northern region, okay? Well, the thing about it, though, is that, again, Cavour has a little bit of an issue because he actually takes his role back and he comes back to the job and stuff like that, but he has a little bit of an issue. He is getting very close to Rome, okay? So like now that you actually have Florence, Lombardy, and then also Sardinia, Piedmont, you are in a very, very large state that is very, very close to Rome and can actually easily anger many of the other European countries who are very, very devoutly Catholic, right? Well, the thing that they decided to do is they decided to write up a treaty with France to prevent the French from getting involved and prevent them from being convinced by the Pope to come in and stop the unification movement, right? So they actually create this document called the Treaty of Turin, where they actually give Nice and Savoy, these two little guys right here, to France, and France still owns them today, right? So, give those two provinces of Nice and Savoy to France to prevent Napoleon from coming in to help the Papal States and help rid the idea of this unified Italy, right? So going into it, though, as you can see right here, okay, 1859, 1860, they gobbled all this stuff up, and then it goes Florence, whack, and it goes right in there as well. They also, though, got this region right here in Ravenna as well, okay? So the Papal States have gotten a little bit smaller, all right? So what they do after the Treaty of Turin, though, they realize, what if we don't go top down? What if we start going bottom up, right? So going into it, what you need to understand is enter now the real hero of Italy, the real hero of their unification movement. The difference in the big thematic movement stuff is this guy named Giuseppe Garibaldi, okay? So Garibaldi is a very, very important figure that actually comes in to help finish the job for Cavour. This is a master stroke of genius by Cavour to make it not look so deliberate, to make it not look like they're trying super, super hard to unify Italy, because in 1860, after the Treaty of Turin, Garibaldi recruits an army of 1,000 young patriots, and he dresses all of them in red, and he calls them the Red Shirts. Now, Victor Emmanuel and Cavour, this is the genius part, okay? The Red Shirts is a small militia army that plans on going down and landing in Sicily and moving its way up southern Italy to actually create a unified state along with that as well. How does Victor Emmanuel feel about this? He loves it. He does not directly support it because he doesn't want to anger the Catholic Church and he doesn't want to anger the Pope at the time, right? So he actually allows them to go down there and start their invasion. The Sicilian peasants, when they land, you have to understand Garibaldi lands in Palermo, has a very, very large battle there, wins it against the Spanish cadet branch of the Bourbon dynasty. They're like the people that own southern Italy at this time is a cadet branch of the Spanish Bourbon dynasty. So they're actually just a very, very large, very, very rich northern family that owns the kingdom of the two Sicilies. So the thing that about that when you're looking at, though, is the Sicilian peasants actually were inspired by Garibaldi and his actual red shirts, and they rose up and joined his militia, right? Revolted against the landlords, and now southern Italy is beginning to convert to a new country as a guerrilla warfare tactic army begins to sweep through the entire area. There's Garibaldi landing in Palermo right there, and these are his red shirts fighting against the Spanish, cadet branch of the Bourbons and trying to liberate southern Italy. And exactly like what I just said, this is really, really big. Garibaldi used guerrilla tactics, right? He used guerrilla tactics to beat much larger armies that actually were in southern Italy, and he is now right next to the Papal States. Garibaldi goes all the way through southern Italy, which is very, very agrarian and didn't have a huge military presence in the first place, and he's right underneath the Papal States. So what do Victor Emmanuel II and Count Cavour do now? They send Sardinian or northern Italian forces to come down and protect the Papal States, to try and make the church feel like they're being protected by northern Italy, not actually left out in the cold or trying to be taken over. See how genius this is on Cavour's part? Being like, oh no, we didn't know that Garibaldi was down in the south doing all that. That's crazy. We'll come help you. And then with the entire plan, though, this miracle, quote unquote, that happened, because whenever the Sardinian forces met Garibaldi, rather than fighting them, Garibaldi handed over everything he conquered to Victor Emmanuel II in Sardinia. That means that we now have a northern Italy that's under one flag, a southern Italy that's under one flag, and a connecting territory right around the Papal States that connects them all together. So you now have, in 1861, because of the movements of Garibaldi and this very, very famous painting of the two of them actually shaking hands with one another and creating the Italian unified state, you now have the Kingdom of Italy, right? At this moment, when these two men decided to shake hands and then Garibaldi gave the territory away to Victor Emmanuel, Kingdom of Italy was created, right? So because you now have a contiguous Italian country that is going to be under one ruler, Victor Emmanuel II. Why would Garibaldi do this? Why would he do this? Why would he just give away all the lands that he had just taken over with his red shirt army? Because he is a romantic, and because he believes that the unified country of Italy is more important than anything else. He actually could have been dictator of southern Italy if he so felt like it, but he just decided not to, right? And so Italy united into a kingdom and into a common country in 1861. And in this political cartoon right here, you can actually see Cavour right there and Garibaldi building the boot of Italy together, right? So the thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, is Italy would be a parliamentary monarchy, neither really radical nor completely democratic, and they did have some lingering problems. It's not like it was going to be this like fairy tale and stuff like that, where literally everybody's like, oh, Italy did it perfectly, and then there were no issues. They actually had tons of issues going into it, which are going to actually kind of affect them going into World War I in a really big way. Northern Italy is extremely industrious and very quick to progress, whereas southern Italy was still very agrarian and slow-paced. This is still an issue that Italian politics deals with to this day. The Papal States didn't completely join like Italy until 1870, even though they were losing bits and pieces of their territory. But by 1870, they finally join up, and Rome becomes a principality and an actual city of Italy. The Vatican, though, in the 1920s becomes its own little independent country. There are also going to be very large anarchist rebellions in the 1900s. We'll talk about anarchism and anarchy, this growing idea and revolt movement that was happening in the next unit, where people were like, you know what's the best government? No government. And they literally just wanted to kill any royal or figure that they could get their hands on. They're very big in political assassinations. And so also another big thing about it is Italian immigration. So what's going to end up happening due to a large amount of crop failures in the late 1800s, a ton of southern Italians are going to immigrate and leave Italy to try and find somewhere else to live because they did not feel supported by northern Italy, right? They didn't feel the northern Italians supported them in the famines and also in like the very bad harvest that they were having. So a lot of them immigrated to places like South America, North America, and particularly to the United States, right? That's why for many of you in the late 1800s, if you have any Italian heritage whatsoever, you're probably from Sicily or southern Italy, and it happened during this time period. And only about 0.5 million people could vote in this big new liberal parliamentary monarchy out of the 22 million Italian citizens. So they still had some issues and stuff like that that they're figuring out, but Italy becomes a country in 1861. We'll talk more about Germany tomorrow.